What is up, ladies and gentle nerds? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHocks42 on the internet, and today we have another Decktech video. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't hesitate to like, comment, and subscribe. They help feed the algorithm and let YouTube know that it'd be nice if they toss a couple bucks my way. Anyway, I appreciate that very much. Thank you. But most importantly, thank you for tuning in and watching. Thank you for being here. All right, so this deck, I call it Groglor, and if you're wondering what the heck does that mean, it is because this is built around a particular two-card combo that has some of the most interesting names that we've seen in Magic the Gathering's recent memory. Although Neon Dynasty is no doubt gonna produce some interesting names as well. But here we have Grolnok the Omnivore. Whenever a frog you control attacks, you mill 3 cards. All right, I like milling stuff. I enjoy my graveyard. And then whenever a permanent card is put into your graveyard from your library, you exile it with a Croak counter on it, and you may play lands and cast spells from among cards you own in exile with Croak counters on them. So when you mill permanents, you effectively draw them for as long as Grolnok remains on the battlefield. If Grolnok gets removed, that static ability is removed, and as a result, you do lose access to those cards with Croak counters. However, if Grolnok sticks around, you have basically a whole other hand that's potentially as many as 3 cards just when Grolnok alone attacks, but fortunately, we have some other cards that can create frogs. But there's another interaction that is incredibly important that gives this deck its name, and that is with Oglor the Devoted Assistant. Hence the name Groglor. It's Grolnak and Oglor. And no, I'm not speaking Klingon. These are actual Magic the Gathering card names. So Oglor Devoted Assistant says at the beginning of your upkeep, you look at the top 2 cards of your library, then put one of them into your graveyard. Again, okay, we're milling a little bit, but we have some choice over what we mill and what we draw. Cool. That's very helpful. It's an obligatory surveil 1 at the beginning of your draw step. Great. Except you get to see both cards. Awesome. Like this little guy, like that alone right there, 2/2. It's a 1/1 for 2. With that ability, already worth the price of admission. But wait, there's more. Whenever a creature card is put into your graveyard from your library or hand, it perpetually gains when this card leaves your graveyard, create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token. So what happens is, with Oglor's ability, you mill a card. You mill a creature card. That creature perpetually gains whenever this creature leaves the battlefield, create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token. Grolnok says that whenever a permanent card is milled, and immediately goes into exile with a Croak counter on it. So what happens is you immediately create a tapped 2/2 zombie token. Now note, that zombie token does not have decayed. That is a legit 2/2 body that just enters the battlefield tapped. So it's a little slow to get started, but once it gets moving, it's a legit body that your opponent has to deal with. So that's great. And so those two together, absolutely bonkers, bananas, crazy, and super duper fun. Now, we also have another card in here that really makes this deck sing, because if all 3 of these cards can hit the battlefield at the same time, oh, be ready for some fireworks. It is so much fun, and that card is Willow Geist. Willow Geist says whenever one or more cards leaves your graveyard, cards, doesn't have to be permanents, doesn't have to be creatures, just any card leaving the graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Willow Geist, and it has trample. It's a 1/1 for 1 with trample, which is my favorite stat line of all time. And then when Willow Geist dies, you gain life equal to its power, which is just a nice little bonus. But really what we're trying to do here is we want to get Willow Geist, Oglor, and Grolnok on the field and mill as much as we possibly can. In milling, what we're doing is we're then throughout the course of that milling, we're going to be milling creatures into our graveyard, and each time a creature gets milled into our graveyard, we exile it with a Croak counter. We have the ability to play it out, so we just effectively draw the card, and we get an Oglor trigger and a Willow Geist trigger at the exact same time for each one. That's fantastic. So that's lovely. We really, really enjoy that. But we have a couple of other key pieces that feed off of this. Now you'll notice every card in the deck either mills cards into our graveyard or does something with cards when they're in our graveyard. We also have a ton of flashback spells, and flashback spells are especially useful with Willow Geist, because when you cast a flashback spell, especially one like, say, Turn the Earth, when you flash a spell back, you put it into exile. That is a card leaving the graveyard, which triggers Willow Geist. If we cast Turn the Earth, for example, you choose 3 target cards in graveyards, can be yours, can be your opponent's, can be both. The owner of those cards shuffles them into their libraries and you gain 2 life. So it's a little bit of life gain, which is nice. That's kind of irrelevant, but doesn't hurt. And what this can do is it forces us to exile cards from our, we can exile card, or we can shuffle cards from our graveyard back into our library, which can buff the Willow Geist. And if we flash it back, in addition to its initial cast, then we get, when we flash it back and target a card in our graveyard, we get two triggers. We get one from the flashback of Turn the Earth leaving the graveyard and going into exile, and then we also get another one from it resolving and the card shuffling back into our library. So that's pretty fantastic. And so Turn the Earth becomes a combat trick when Willowgeist is online. Also, if we mill, say, 2 copies of Oglor and we don't have any other way to retrieve it out of our graveyard, we could put those into our graveyard, or put them back into our library and potentially draw them, which is nice. So yeah, so there's that. Also, the cool part about this engine is any 2 pieces of it can work together. Grolnok and Willowgeist produce a really powerful combination, even if Oglor's not on the field. If Oglor is on the field, however, and Willowgeist is doing its thing, then all of a sudden we're pumping up the Willowgeist and we're creating zombie tokens. Okay, that's cool too. That works. We can we can live with that. But if all 3 of them get online, then the snowball really starts rolling downhill very, very quickly. So we have a couple of other key pieces here. We have Covetous Castaway, which is a 1/3 for 2. So it's got a body that can block, which is nice. And when it dies, we mill 3 cards. Dope. We love that. Additionally, it has Disturb. And when you disturb something, you cast it out of your graveyard, which means that it's a card from your graveyard leaving the graveyard. Also, it's a creature. So it's a creature that can go into our graveyard, potentially from our hand or library. Then we can disturb it, pull it out, and get an Oglor and a Willowgeist trigger. Dope. Love it. Additionally, Ghostly Castigator, the disturbed spirit version of this card, is a 3/4 flyer, so it's a body our opponent has to respect and deal with that comes out into play for 5. And when Ghostly Castigator enters the battlefield, you may shuffle up to 3 target cards from your graveyard into your library. And then if it would go into your graveyard from anywhere, you exile it instead. Standard disturb boilerplate. So this card is very useful because it can really help buff up our Willowgeists, and it itself disturbs out of our graveyard. And it mills. Every single piece of this card checks off the boxes. All of them do what we want the card to do. Now, we don't have a stack outlet to help it die, but a 1/3 with how many aggro decks are running around right now, we'll probably get an opportunity to block with it to get the mill. And if we just mill it directly into our graveyard, then we can just disturb it immediately and not even worry about going through the first step. So nothing wrong with that. All right, we also have Vilespawn Spider. Vilespawn Spider is in here for a couple of reasons. Primarily, at the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card. It's a 2-drop that mills every upkeep. Great. Love it. That's exactly what we want it to do. Additionally, it's a 2/3 with reach for 2 that's in our colors. That's great. It also has this ability where you can pay for it, tap it, sacrifice it, create a 1/1 green insect creature token for each creature card in your graveyard, and you can activate it only as a sorcery. That is a nice possibility, a nice possible plan B out if we aren't able to get our engine online. However, if we are successful in getting our engine online, we are going to be exiling or shuffling back in creatures from our graveyard into our library or into exile. And as a result, we're not really going to have that many creatures in the graveyard. So we're not really going to pop this for 8 or 9 very often, but it's possible. And so having that emergency panic button to create a whole wide board of blockers, especially if we're going up against Grill aggro or something, we just need to survive one more turn, that can absolutely get us there. Getting 4 or 5 blockers at the price of 1 is definitely worth it. And the 2/3 reach is very relevant because that can also block a lot of pesky dragons that are flying around out there right now. So that's really darn useful. Speaking of small creatures that mill us, we also have the Deathbonnet Sprout. At the beginning of your upkeep, you mill a card. If there are 3 or more creature cards in your graveyard, you transform Deathbonnet Sprout into the Deathbonnet Hulk, which says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile a card from a graveyard. If a creature was exiled this way, you put a from a graveyard. Doesn't have to be yours. You put a +1/+1 counter on Deathbonnet Hulk. This card's great for a number of reasons. This is like a green Delver of Secrets that cares about creatures. It's really the name of the game, but it fills the yard instead of working off the library. So this card is fantastic. It helps us mill in the early game, which is exactly what we want to do. Put some cards in our graveyard, really leverage those, see what we can do with them. Awesome. Love it. Dope. There's nothing wrong with that. Then the Deathbonnet Hulk says that at the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile a card from a graveyard, which allows us to remove cards from our graveyard. So in the beginning, it helps load our yard up. And then once we get a Willowgeist online, the other side is going to help us remove cards from our graveyard to buff our Willowgeist and buff itself while we're at it, and potentially get Oglor triggers if those cards were milled when Oglor was on the field. So Deathbonnet Hulk does, again, much like the Covetous Castaway, does all the every step along the way. It just checks all the boxes. It does exactly what we want to be doing in this deck. And then our last 2 cards are cards that have flashback, specifically because that pays off. That pays off with the you know, the Willow Geist, and that's Winterthorn Blessing, which has put a +1/+1 counter up to one target creature you control, tap up to one target creature you don't control, and that creature doesn't untap during its control's untap steps, and this has flashback for 2. So Winterthorn Blessing is one of those cards that when I first read it, I remember thinking, that's a cute trick, it'll be okay. And then somebody played it against me in a game of Limited, and I was furious because it tapped down one of my creatures for effectively 4 turns and buffed their creature twice in the process. That can be devastating if you are in a position to be on the attack. By being able to get rid of those pesky blockers, and the whole time by leveraging Winterthorn Blessing and its flashback ability, we're buffing our Willow Geist. And so not only are we getting pesky blockers out of the way, we are also buffing our team in the process in multiple ways, because we're getting the Willow Geist triggers every time Winterthorn Blessing is flashed back. So it helps us grow our team in a big way, and it helps us apply that pressure to close the game out. So I found Winterthorn Blessing is just a shockingly powerful card. It's just consistently an overperformer in decks where I put it. So I gotta say, I'm a big fan of this card. Then also Croaking Counterpart. I'll be honest, Croaking Counterpart is a card that is in here not for the memes, that's not fair to say, but it's in here because it has a lot of interesting, unique utility, and it synergizes really, really well with Grolnok. Specifically because we can use this to steal one of our opponent's creatures. If it has a strong enter the battlefield effect, we can take advantage of that, which is pretty great. And if, you know, like if they have an Inquisitor Captain, for example, we can just steal their Inquisitor Captain, make it a frog, and then the next turn, put Grolnok on the field, attack with the frog, get the mill triggers, and basically draw 3 cards. So Croaking Counterpart is in here because alongside Grolnok, it's basically pay 3, draw 3, and potentially deal some damage to your opponent. But it also has a lot of cool, interesting interactions and cool, interesting things we can do with it. Also, if it's early in the game, doing a Croaking Counterpart of a Willow Geist or Deathbonnet Sprout is actually very, very useful, because it allows... it helps us build pieces of our engines, build redundancy into our engine. And especially if we copy a Willow Geist, it's going to be getting all the counters, and it's a frog, which is just upside in this situation because we have Grolnok on the field. Now, honorable mentions, cards that I don't have in the current version of this deck. First one that comes to mind is Dryad's Revival. If you wanted to put Dryad's Revival in here, given how much we're going to be milling, that is something that if for your version of the deck, maybe not a bad idea. I don't know exactly what to cut for it. Maybe go down to 2 Winterthorn Blessings or something of that nature. But so far, I gotta say, I'm actually really enjoying having playsets of cards in my decks, because games are so fast these days. I want to be able to see the same. I want my decks to be as consistent as humanly possible, and I find that redundancy is, well, how I justify putting in 4-ofs in my decks primarily. And in this one, you can see that is on display by having 4-ofs everything. That may not be wise. So Dryad's Revival is one that would fit very nicely. Otherworldly Gaze is another one that I considered because it would fill our yard perfectly, and we have selection over what cards go into it, and it has flashback. So Otherworldly Gaze might actually be an absolute house in this deck, and I just haven't really figured out where to fit it in yet. So something to consider, things to keep in mind for if you decide to tinker with this list and come up with your own variants. And I'd love to see what those are. And if there are any other suggestions, any other tech that you come up with that I haven't considered, please don't hesitate to leave a comment. I'd love to see it. All right, so that is the Groglor deck. This is an Alchemy exclusive deck, and specifically because of Oglor. Although, looking at it, Oglor is the only Alchemy card. So if you wanted to build a version of this deck that did not include Oglor, and specifically a Willow Geist Grolnok deck, you absolutely could. So that wouldn't be that hard. But Oglor is a piece of the engine that I was really trying to make work, so... And they're mythics. And when you craft mythics, you build the deck around mythics. Anyway. All right, so let's take this thing out into the ladder and see what we can do with it. Okay, so in our opening hand, we have 2 Covetous Castaways and a Croaking Counterpart. This is actually... We don't have any of our key engine pieces, but we've got the 3 lands we need and a Winterthorn Blessing. Let's give it a shot. This is kind of a sketchy... This is a content keep, if you will. Mulliganing there would have been reasonable. But at the end of the day, the hand composition, we have a couple of 2-drops, a good 3-drop, and we have Grolnok. The one, the only. Just like that, this hand went from being pretty lousy to being pretty darn solid. All right, and we got a Ranger class on the opponent's board. Nothing wrong with that. I'm going to go ahead and use the Croaking Counterpart on the Covetous Castaway. So we're going to get a 1/1 frog Then when it dies, we mill 3 cards. If we top deck a land here, we'd be able to play Grolnok and attack with our Covetous Castaway frog, who has a lovely jaunty hat on in the artwork, which, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, right? I love how cute that frog token is. I also love how they use the same artwork for all the frogs, regardless of what they're copying. Which, I mean, I don't know how else they would do it. I don't know if they would take, like, artwork for whatever it was copied and then just, like, superimpose a frog into it. That would be kind of lame. There's nothing saying they couldn't do it. All right, and so our frog is actually going to bite the big one to get rid of the 2/2 token, which I'm not super jazzed about, but we are going to mill some cards here, and that's okay. Milling a Grolnok, not milling into our land, which is definitely problematic. Don't love that. I think the time has come for a Vilespawn Spider, and be sad that we missed our 4th land drop. That actually was really bad for us. Although, if we mill a Turn the Earth, we could actually, or draw into a Turn the Earth, we could actually, well, we only milled 1 land there. So we weren't going to draw a land anyway, but we could have drawn an Oglor, which would have been nice. Again, it would have been nice. Not the end of the world, not a huge deal, but it would have been okay. Well, yeah, we got 2 critters in the bin so far, in Oglor and the Deathbonnet Sprout. And our opponent is playing relatively slowly, which I got to say I respect. One of the things I've realized is that I play Magic kind of the way I talk, a little too fast. And that's something that I need to work on and think through my moves. And so when I see my opponent, there was a time when I was like, come on, opponent, you're playing aggro. Just throw the card down. It's okay. You got this. And now I'm like, you know, they're taking their time. They're really doing their due diligence, making sure they are picking the right lines. Okay, you're good. You're good, opponent. I see you. You're all right. Yeah, the time for being frustrated about that is in the past, methinks. I think I'm going to put the Covetous Castaway in front of it, and we're going to mill some stuff and potentially get some... So we mitigate 3 of the damage, potentially draw into... Well, or potentially mill into some answers here. Yeah, well, none of those were lands, so we weren't going to draw a land. Well, that one was a land, but this one is too. Hooray! All right. Yes, that's right. I said hooray. Like an excited child, and I stand by it. All right, so at this point, because we missed that 4th land drop, Grolnok is a turn late, and given how powerful creatures are these days, especially a tenacious pup feeding a Tavlor with a Storm Charge Slasher on the field, I mean, this is a brilliant setup by our opponent. As far as Gruul Werewolves go, they couldn't really do much better than this. So they hit, I don't know if you'd call it the nuts, but they hit a really, really good sequence, and we missed our 4th land drop. You know, so... what you gonna do? And at this point, the Blood Rage, the Storm Charge Slasher being able to grant haste is a huge problem. Yep, farewell, Grolnok, you will be missed. Yeah, the Blood Rage Alpha is pretty darn good, as it turns out. All right, so we are gonna get rid of Tavlar, which is meaningful, but they also got rid of our entire board, which is a little bit of a problem. And they draw 4 cards because Tavlar is Toski, because why not? When in doubt, if you need to make a tribal card that's pretty darn good, give it the ability to just draw an obscene number of cards when you do the thing the tribe wants to do. And Werewolves, it turns out, they want to punch a bunch. All right, so we're going to play out Grolnok here, but they proceed to attack with all in the game, so it just doesn't matter. The other option was to cast out our Covetous Castaway and a Winterthorn Blessing to tap down the Blood Rage Alpha. But they still had lethal because of the Reckless Stormseeker. Oh, then Halana and Elena with the Tenacious Pup boost. And again, yeah, no, we are 15 kinds of dead here. That's right, 15. That's an exact number. So our opponent was able to put some synergies together and at the end of the day produce more value than we were. And the Tenacious Pup alone with the Halana Elena trigger buffs up to a 5/6. Get out of here. That's absurd. All right, the most damage we can prevent is 5, so Grolnok is going to step in front of that, and we're not even going to get past the first strike damage. Yeah, no, that was a slobber knocker. We didn't stand a chance. All right, let's try moving on to the next game. All right, so we have the Croaking Counterpart Grolnok. Again, it's setting up. This setup actually looks very similar to that last game, which, I mean, like I said in the deck tech, I do run 4 ofs throughout the deck to make sure that the deck is consistent. So we are missing a Willow Geist, we are missing a Deathbonnet, we are missing a Oglor. So if we can get any of those, we'll be in very good shape. Although what we have here is we have a Covetous Castaway on 2 into a Croaking Counterpart on 3 into Grolnok on 4. No, never mind. Just kidding. We have an Oglor on 2. To help make sure we hit our land drops moving forward, because the card selection is going to be very relevant. That said, our opponent played a turn 1 Haunted Ridge. Oh, they're on Grixis. This is going to suck. All right. Galazeth Prismari. So they're on Grixis Dragons. All right, I'm going to let Oglor go to the graveyard. He's going to get that special ability, which is nice. Caracal. Time for the Castaway. And Oglor's going to chip in for 1 damage while we can. Let's do this thing. Oglor beatdown. Making it happen. Not the first plan of the deck, but hey, if it works, it works. They're going to Dragon's Fire the Covetous Castaway. Give us a bunch of free mills. That's an interesting choice. I would have gone after Oglor if I were them. I'm gonna put the Winterthorn Blessing in the bin, actually. Deathbonnet Sprout seems like it's worth having in hand. Alright. Grolnok, the Omnivorous, is now live and online. There we go. We have Grolnok and Oglor. Let's see if they survive. Not a given, mind you. Definitely not a given. Moonveil Regent. Good card. Good card. We're gonna let the island go. It doesn't really matter, but we are gonna draw it with Grolnok, so that's nice. All right. And so now the time has come, I think, for some shenanigans. Shenanigans and chicanery. And we are going to hit the Winterthorn Blessing. We're going to buff Grolnok and tap down the Moonveil Regent. We only have the Deathbonnet Sprout in hand, so yeah, you know what? Let's discard our hand. Ding, ding. And draw 2 fresh cards. And we attack. Grolnok triggers a bunch of times. Oglor triggers once. Just kidding, he triggers twice. One to put the ability on the creature perpetually, and then another to actually create the zombie token. I'm feeling pretty good about our situation here. Our opponent was really banking on that Moonveil Regent coming home, and it did not. Delco Dragon, that's a good card. Now they have an opportunity to discard 4 cards and draw 2. How much do they hate their hand? Turns out not very much. They seem to like it. So this is a mid-range Dragons deck. Not bad, not bad. And Oglor's going to trigger again. And again, it would seem. All right, and we've got some Winterthorn's Blessings that we can do some fun shenanigans with. Shenanigans and chicanery and shenanigans and whatnot. So first things first, let's get a Willowgeist online. Gromlock and Winterthorn. I'm going to decline that this time. We'll get there, don't worry. All right, so we can... Did you already play land for turn? Yes. No, we did not. Yes. Never didn't have it. All right, so let's go ahead and activate the Winterthorn Blessing out of our graveyard. We're going to buff our... Does it matter? I'm going to buff the Moonveil Regent. We're going to tap down the Adult Gold Dragon so it stays tapped. Then we're going to throw the Winterthorn Blessing again. This time we're going to buff Oglor. And we're going to pin down the Moonveil Regent so it also stays tapped. And this time we will discard our hand because we're going to discard a Grolnok and draw 2. Which seems pretty decent. Attack with the team. Grolnok triggers a bunch, which means Willowgeist is going to trigger a bunch. And Oglor and Grolnok are going to trigger a bunch, which means Willowgeist is going to trigger a bunch. Ladies and gentlemen, we're doing it. Turns out a 7/7 Trampler for 1 that also produces a zombie army. It's pretty good. And that's exactly what we have here with these 3 on the field simultaneously. So let's see. They could have some kind of Wrath. They're probably sitting on an Inferno of Star Mounts. Now, notably, they didn't hit the Dragon Whelp. I'm willing to bet just about anything that they are built around Dragon Whelp, and they just didn't get it. So Goldspan Dragon is pretty darn nice. They do choose to discard their hand and draw a single card. Is that single card going to be enough? I've got to be honest, I'll be surprised if it is. And Oglor's going to do its thing. Now, note our hand. These are all... So, yeah. That's fair. I would scoop it up there, too. All right, so all those cards on the bottom of the screen, those are all cards that were either exiled with Croak counters, had flashback, and were in our graveyard, or were genuinely in our hand. The amount of options that we had at our disposal there was something else. Like, we had all the choices in the world. And you love to see it. Not to mention a 7/7 trampling Willowgeist plus an army of 2/2 zombies. Let's move on to game 3. I see Willowgeist, Oglor, and Grolnok all in the opening hand plus 3 lands. This is a snap keep. All right, so we're going to keep the Willowgeist, and then I think I'm going to throw the Vilespawn Spider on 2. Actually, wait a minute. We're not going to have access to both of those. Well, let's throw the Willowgeist on 1. So if we top deck into an island or a forest or a pathway, we'll be good. An untapped mana source would definitely be ideal here. Speaking of, there it is. Never didn't have it. We're going to throw the Vilespawn Spider on 2. That way, if there's any removal from our opponent on turn 2, it goes after it. The Vilespawn Spider looks like a very tempting target, and then that means Oglor will survive next turn. Lightning Bloodcaster. All right, all right. Good thing we have reach with the Spider. All right. All right, time to get Oglor online. Not going to attack with anything. We're going to keep the Vilespawn Spider back to deal with the Bloodcaster. And I don't know if they didn't see the reach or if they have a trick in hand. They may have a trick for us, like the Vampire's Vengeance that deals with 2 damage to all non-vampire creatures. That would blow us out here. Or Meat Hook on 1. That's pretty bad too. Yeah, yeah, that hurts. That hurts quite a bit, actually. We still have Grolnok coming in, so we're far from out of it, but that was a huge blow to us. Surprise, surprise. Meat Hook Massacre does a lot of damage to creature-based boards. It's crazy, right? Who knew? And that was a turn 3. That was very well played by our opponent. Yeah, very well played. So they did see the reach, they just had the trick. I'll learn Pit Fighter, decent card. They discard Henrika Domnathi. That I'm surprised by. We're attacking with the Grolnok because I want some more options. Vilespawn Spider and a Croaking Counterpart, I think, is what's on our agenda next. All right, so now we've got some more froggies, so we can draw cards with Grolnok. They're sitting on 4 mana right now. Sorin the Mirthless is a pretty good card. So this appears to be Rakdos Vamps. I'm also seeing Hostile in their mana base, which strikes me as pretty darn cool. Because that's one of those cards you don't see very often, but it's just quite good. Turn the Earth. I like that. All right. Dreamroot Cascade. I like that too. Dog pile on Sorin. Frog pile on Sorin. All right, and we get an Oglor there, which is a pretty good hit. They could put the Pit Fighter in front of Grolnok here, and it's going to ping us down 1 with the Meat Hook Massacre, which is fine. Not the end of the world. And Sorin survives here, which I'm not super jazzed about, but the down tick is meaningful, so I'll take it. All right, first things first, let's get Oglor into the mix. As well as the Deathbonnet Sprout, because I want to mill more stuff. I love milling stuff. It's my favorite. All right, then we have a Croaking Counterpart in hand. How much do we want to commit to this board? I think I want to wait. They might have another board wipe. Now, they aren't running Snowlands, so they're probably not going to show a Blood on the Snow anytime soon. All right, Winterthorn Blessing can come in handy to deal with that token. The Null Priest of Oblivion. Good card. Good card. 2/1 for... 2/1 Menace Lifelink for 2. Pretty decent. Valerian Bloodcaster, also pretty decent. All right, mill. Grolnok triggers. I believe we're going to end up milling both of these cards, so this is an irrelevant choice. Yep. Play at the island. Our opponent has seen enough, apparently. I'll take it. I was trying to play more slowly and be more deliberate about my lines, and apparently our opponent has seen enough. I can't blame them. We were getting some pretty good value off those two, and it was working to good effect. So, anyway, it works, ladies and gentlemen. The deck works. It's so 2-1, not a bad record for a brief sample size on the ladder. Especially going with the Meathook Massacre was beautifully played. So PJ, I gotta say, well done on that. That was a beautiful blind, and I think you were actually in a really good position there. But I had some options. Winterthorn Blessing was going to tap down your stuff, and I was going to be able to get in for quite a bit of an attack. And more specifically, because of the Vilespawn Spider, Frog, and the Grolnok the Omnivore, I was going to be effectively drawing 6 cards a turn, which is pretty gnarly. So I can appreciate the scoop there. Anyway. Thank you so much for hanging out. I appreciate you. This has been a load of fun. Thank you for checking out the deck. If you have any questions on it, or if you have any suggestions for how to tune it up, in addition to the cards that I mentioned earlier, I would love to hear it. Please don't hesitate to leave those in the comments below. And like I mentioned at the top, please don't hesitate to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much. Have a phenomenal day, and I'll catch you on the next one.